work on this. So I said, okay, listen, you're in debtor's prison essentially. We'll relieve all your debts if you come and you work on this. So he was able to conscript a large force of labor. But then again, conscripting people is hardly a serious problem. So you would also have, laborers drawn in from these populations that we had just mentioned were displaced. You can see here, right, the northern axis north is this way, so it's oriented on the cardinal points of the compass. Just like our temples and other major constructions dating way, way back. And this palace is actually one of the only to be fully excavated. Let's zoom in here on the palace. I also should mention this was actually excavated by the French, Émile Botta and Victor Place in 1853. And you can see it's a massive, massive complex. Also, it was excavated by the Oriental Institute in 1925 to 1928, around there. And you can see the palace complex, again, has its own system of fortifications that are built into the city wall. So just jumping up here, looking at this a bit closer, right, with two gates entering into a central royal complex and a ramp leading up to the palace of Sargon himself. We see these three main sections, which include palaces, temples, and residences of large officials, right? So we have official palaces like Residence K, which we'll look at in a second, but also the establishment of temples devoted to Nabu and several other gods. Look at the proximity here between the palace and the temples, right? So here's the Temple of Nabu, some subsidiary temples and chapels, and then a ziggurat as well. No separation, right, between these palaces these temples and the palaces themselves. A palace built in the same style, right, outer courtyard, inner courtyard, and adjacent throne room again, drawing on what we've seen again and again. But this time the proximity to these temples is really striking, and I think goes hand in hand with kind of the way that Sargon sees himself. Again, connected with this divine right to be re-steering the Assyrian ship in his own direction. Not only are these temples attached to the palace, but the larger temple of Nabu, which had its own fortifications, is actually connected to the palace complex by a bridge. So a private bridge for Sargon to be able to come and go with his entourage as he pleases. So if this wasn't clear enough, a bridge to the temple is making its point clearly. Let's see here. This large courtyard, we find a series of reliefs similar to those, again, that we see at the Assyrian Northwest Palace at Nimrud. But in this case, only the main reception rooms, the throne room, and the associated courtyard were decorated with reliefs, right? So the throne room itself, jump back here. And that appears to be because this program of reliefs and decoration was not completed for reasons we'll get to in a little bit. But you can see here that the use of large orthostats and then lamassu again it's quite striking. In fact, you can see these lamassu are oriented to the right instead of being a forward-facing lamassu, like the ones that we saw at Nimrud. These ones are actually oriented to the side, so it's a very arresting effect. If you're in this courtyard, you get the feeling that this lamassu is going somewhere else, and then boom, it looks at you and spots you and just sort of nails you down with its eyes. It would have been very, very intimidating. Just a very effective way of capturing the attention and also getting across that idea, right? This is a sacred space, a defended space that you're entering. And of course, right, this entrance here, these guys are, right, entering into the main throne room here. In addition to these lamassu, we see figures that are named Lamu, which roughly translates to hairy ones. These large figures at Khorsabad that are actually, as you can see, subduing these little diminutive lions. Actually, they're not diminutive, they're kind of life-size lions. These guys are just absolutely gigantic. And you can see they sort of stand between the Lamassu here and are stand-ins for Sargon himself. And of course, right, texts from the reign of Sargon, right? Sargon, as we said, was known to the Assyrians. He's a famous Assyrian king, or a famous Akkadian king that the Assyrians knew about. And we look at the connections here, right? All the way back to the actual material culture of the Akkadians. Here's an Akkadian seal, right, that we saw before, of one of these hairy, nude-belted heroes, right, battling lions. So conspicuous use of Akkadian style by Sargon, right? Who's, again, trying to emulate the original Sargon. And again, just to give you a sense of what it would be like to be waiting to enter into this throne room, this is what you're looking at, right? This is what you're, sort of being looked at while you're waiting to be admitted into the throne room and before the king itself. So again, a very, very effective program of reliefs that would have gotten its point across clearly. Even the lion, right, is kind of sneering at you as it looks down at you. We also see scenes similar to that at the Northwest Palace, right, of things that would take place, right, a tribute being brought to the king. In addition to being put in your place by the Lamu and the Lamassu, you're also, right, looking at what you should be doing. You should be bringing tribute and good news to the Assyrian king. And this is what's right, taking place here also in the courtyard with these rhytons. I want you to kind of keep these guys in mind. These are actually drinking rhytons with a lion head on the bottom. And then, of course, wonderfully detailed and inscribed things like chariots being brought, goods, exotics, valuables coming from the periphery being brought again to the center at Assyria. So booty from these campaigns that Sargon reinitiates, because under his reign he continues this program of yearly expansion, every year going out and conquering wherever there happens to be a problem, and then coming back with the profits of that campaign. We see actually a number of seascapes as well, and there's actually a shift in the compositional approach of the reliefs at Khorsabad compared to those Assyrian reliefs we've seen before. Just kind of zoom in on one of these. Anybody want to take a stab at what's going on in these images? Some of the things that you can pick out here. Clearly it's a seascape, right? These guys on boats. But what are they doing? Give you another one. Let's look at this one. This is a little bit clearer. Again, that Assyrian attention to detail, not just the details of, right, musculature and realism, but also an attention to the kind of flora and fauna that someone would find in these regions, right? There have been studies that actually compare these fish to fish in the Mediterranean and elsewhere. This probably, again, is the Mediterranean. But what's going on? What are these long plank-looking things that are kind of coming down here? Yeah. Yeah, they're not quite fishing, although there are lots of fish, right? Even turtles. I think there's a shark in there somewhere. There's a crab. Again, another turtle. I don't know, this looks like a scorpion. Oh, no, it's a lobster, actually. Maybe it's a lobster. There are no lobsters in the Mediterranean, right? Where are lobsters, the distribution of lobsters? Maybe Sargon made his way to North America. He went to Maine. I don't know about lobsters. Maybe this is again. Well, I mean, also we have snakes, and also there's sort of a strange merfish man here. This again like a lamassu. There's also there's a lamassu, right? For some reason, there's a winged bull making its way. So there's compositional animals, right? Mythical animals too that fill this space in this composition. But really, what's the narrative? What's taking place here? Yeah.
Are they raiding a city?
They might be bringing tribute from a city, but it doesn't really seem like it's a warfare, right? We don't see the same sort of paraphernalia, right? The Assyrians, right, when they attack by water, we would see what? Well, we'd see frogmen, right? We'd see chariots being brought by raft. We don't see any of that. It doesn't seem like it's a war scene, but you're thinking in the right way. And the idea, again, it kind of hinges on what are these long things?
Are these flags?
Flags? Not quite. Not quite. They're a little big to be flags. Think about resources. Think about wood. Exactly, they're trees. Yeah, this is a scene of logging that's taking place, right? The cypress or the cedars of Lebanon actually being brought down the coastline, being brought from the northern regions and then being brought down to southern Palestine, where they could then be brought inland and brought into the Assyrian heartland. In fact, also we see that it might be, these are probably, again, cedars coming from Lebanon, but we see images of islands too. This is a sort of mountainous island, right, with a fortification on it. And it's thought that this actually might be a representation of Cyprus, that Sargon sent troops to Cyprus. And indeed, he says that he did. He says, I sent troops to Cyprus and I took a tribute from them. The kind of thing that we might say, yeah, Sargon, right, you meant it to Cyprus or whatever, except for the fact that actually he proves that he did it. He set up a stele there, which is quite incredible. He did have trade relations with Cyprus, and like Tiglath-Pileser III setting up his stele on the borders of Urartu, it seems as though Sargon, we don't know, right, did he take over Cyprus? Probably it was a little bit more of a trade arrangement, but he did have enough influence there to carve this stele of himself, a stele which talks about his victories and his titles and all the things we've come to expect. So, and again, Cyprus, of course, is still a very important copper mining area during the Iron Age in addition to the Late Bronze Age. So yeah, a really interesting composition, and one that in terms of the way it's executed represents a pretty dramatic shift away from what we've seen at Nimrud. We've got a perspective, right, which is almost a bird's eye perspective on this entire composition, which is devoid of any kind of registers. Instead of that sort of worm's eye view, looking at a composition up and at a scene that's sitting on a solid ground line, this takes the viewer up in the air, looking down on this large, expanse, and which is filled, with these stylized waves to represent water. Just a very, very dramatic shift in terms of the way the slab is filled. And actually, the relief, the scene is filled from the entire slab, from the very top to the very bottom, so with no registers at all, and it creates this broad expanse and a new perspective in Assyrian art that we haven't seen since. All right, let's keep going. So, Residence K here in Khorsabad. Again, the residence of an official, probably an official from the court of Sargon II. We don't find carved reliefs, but again, like Tilbarset, a cheaper and easier way of decorating these palaces was to use painting. And so opposite the main entrance to this residence at Khorsabad, we actually see a painting which is about 30 feet high of a god on a pedestal meeting Sargon and probably the crown prince, Sargon's successor Sennacherib, who we'll be talking about later in the week. Who wants to take a stab at this? What kind of connections can you draw from this composition? Things we've seen before. Presentation scenes, of course, right, between the gods and the king, right? We've got again this horned headdress coming off the top.